Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to clear the gap there, the audio went out, but I'm almost positive you're referring to a confused mind says no. So
Yeah.
when you provide too many options, that's almost providing worse than providing no options.
And you've got to one of the tightropes that we walk as marketers is that we want to give content, a lot of it, but at the same time, we don't want to overwhelm the reader or the viewer with too many choices. So your websites have to be simple to navigate and take them directly to the content they're asking for. Right? There's a lot of, Google started, many years ago, Google started fronting very, very heavily on these forced opt-in kinds of web pages where before you could access any content, you had to give us your email and stuff like that. I think that's kind of changed a little bit because I'm seeing a lot more forced opt-in kind of stuff, but it's also where you have the option to just click out and that little box goes away. So there's all kinds of things that have changed. I haven't kept up with all the bells and whistles in the internet marketing industry because my experience always showed me that marketers pretty much only sell you what has stopped working for them. So you're always getting second and third generation tech. So at some point you're going to have to find your own set of systems, your own set of direct marketing principles and what works for you and work within those niches. But learn to innovate, to emulate and then innovate. Don't just emulate and hope to reach the same levels as the people you're studying because you won't do it. You'll never get to the same level as they will. But if you start with them as a model and then innovate based on what works in your niche for you, then the sky's the limit. You're unlimited in what you do. Conversion is all about trust, making sure that they see the obvious answer to their problem and reward them for taking every step of the way. Every click that they give you, give them a reward. Tell them where to go next.
So the next topic I want to talk about is on influence of self.
Influence of self, okay.
Influence of self. And a lot of people that are, and you'd mentioned dating, and certainly something I struggle with my whole life until about 5 years ago, is the idea. I've overcome it wildly. The idea of being able to approach a stranger, whether it's a woman or that you see on the corner or at a bar, or certainly relevant to this topic is a sales prospect. And this concept, and I've heard it called all kinds of things, but we'll call it what it is. It's the feeling of anxiety within self in terms of your projected outcome. So I'd like to talk about that, and then as well, relatively related, is motivating yourself. But how do we better influence ourselves? NLP calls it state, and it's in your model. How do we take control of our internal experience as it relates to the sales call or sales interaction?
Okay. Well, first of all, the fastest hack that you can get is to change your posture and your breathing. Okay. If you haven't seen the TED Talk by Amy Cuddy called Power Poses, that should be your first read after you've gone through this particular video. Understand that your posture and your breathing will dramatically influence every psycho-emotional state that you have, because every psycho-emotional state that you have has a posture and a physiology. And the ones that Amy teaches specifically in that video go directly to sales, marketing, interviews, negotiations, and mediation. It should be standard and really basic training for anyone who's going to go out there and talk to another human being or group of human beings. The second thing you want to learn to do comes in two flavors. A, you want to clean up your shit. No human being comes out of the womb afraid. I mean, they start to develop fear as they're going through the birth process, because you're going from something that's very comfortable, very safe, to something that's very unfamiliar. But as a rule, we learn to be afraid. We learn to be to feel lower than. We learn to feel all these things. They're taught to us by the people who we view as authorities and that we identify with from the 0 to 5. Now, I should clarify, people do come out of the womb afraid, but they're not conceived that way. They can acquire those fears because their mom, who was going through certain feelings, had those feelings. We can clean those up too. It's all fixable. Okay, the longer I do this, the more I see that there's very an ever decreasing amount of things that we can't address. But in terms of call reluctance, approaching, you got to clean up your shit. You got to clean up all the reasons why you internalize that you're less than. The second thing is you got to start making pictures of yourself bigger than the pictures of the people that you're going to be presenting to, because inevitably when it comes to self-image and self-esteem, if you were to create a picture of yourself with your sales prospect, depending on how much you wanted that sale, the actual relative size of the prospect to you can be significant. If you change it, then you change how you feel about that person. And if you really change it, now you take over the frame of the interaction. That's something that's going to, you need a little bit more training to do, but once you understand how it works, you can put yourself in any state you want. Here's the hack. When you look at a stranger, you need to stop thinking of them as your stranger. You need to think of them as your best friend and feel towards them like they're one of your best friends and approach them as if they're one of your best friends. And what you're going to discover is when you do that, the words that come out of your mouth will have a much different feel to them, even though you're saying even if you're doing a canned sales presentation. The feelings that you generate in your body will change everything else. When I teach people persuasion and influence, and I have a complete system that is just ethically unfair in terms of, it's just so powerful and so ethical and so honest and so irresistible that it should be unfair, but it's not. It's actually the most powerful, ethical, and honest way to communicate with another human being and make them want to do what you want them to do. The moment you can generate feelings in your body, everything else that you're trying to affect in your presentation takes care of itself. When we try to present, the way most people are taught to present in a sales call is you have a canned presentation, you have set techniques you're supposed to use to get rapport, set of objections that you're going to use when they throw out the inevitable bombs to the presentation you're going to give. And you're going to have to try and manage all of that and get them to trust you. Well, it doesn't take long before the whole nervous system goes into a sense of overwhelm. Things start being out of certain sets of behaviors, tonalities, speech patterns become dramatically out of proportion with what they would be naturally if you were in a calm, confident, rational, professional way. Whereas if you, and the idea is if we affect these things, we'll generate a feeling of trust and connection with the client. It doesn't always work that way, and that's why we have so much trouble. If we generate the feelings in our body first, then the feelings will create a set of perceptual filters in our mind, the way we perceive the environment, that supports those feelings and reinforces those feelings. It'll generate a tonality and a tempo and an attitude within us that reinforces and is congruent with the feelings that we're having. As a result, when we speak about our product or service from that feeling space, we will be more authentic, we will be more congruent, we will be more trustworthy, and people will simply relate to us better and comply to what we want. And that's where we start. We'll eventually show you how to go into and out of any psycho-emotional state you want, generate the feelings, and transfer them right into the subject so that they start to feel the way you want them to feel before you've even opened your mouth half the time. But that, in essence, when it comes to sales call reluctance, remember that every fear you have, you learned. If you can learn one thing, you can learn something else or unlearn it. Right? There's nothing wrong with you. It was just something you learned, and until your unconscious mind has a better way to do it, it's going to keep doing it. And it's going to take more and more willpower to get out of that car or pick up the phone or get out of from behind the computer, because your unconscious mind is far more adept at generating excuses than your conscious mind is. Okay? So clean up that stuff, remove it, build in the feeling states that you want to have, focus on what the sales call will get you and not on the sales call itself. Remember, your goal is to go out there and help people get what they want. As a result of that, you're going to get what you want. Don't focus on the sales call. Focus on the reward of going out there and making the sales call, because that's what's getting you out of bed in the first place. Inevitably, when people lose motivation, it's because they move from focusing on the reward to focusing on the steps, the process. Focus on what you want and do the steps rather than focusing on the steps you don't want to do. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I want to give a tip that the viewer can put into practice right now while they're listening, and I'm going to actually ask them to go ahead and do it. And it's something, you know, specific to what we're talking about. Something that we did in one of your meetups, the Rocky hands. And
Rocky hands? You mean this?
so, yep.
Okay.
And so go ahead and let's all do it together. You can see my sweaty armpits. And
that's right.
What you'll notice.
Go ahead.
What you'll notice is as you are sitting in your, or stand up even better, is you can't help but feel calm and confident and in a state of mastery, and that can override your internal state of anxiety. And interestingly enough, I actually used it once. I was at lunch in Mission Valley, and I saw a girl I wanted to talk to. She was sitting with her friends in a normal environment that most people would just be way too intimidated to put themselves out there. And of course I felt and experienced that reflective anxiety. Went in the bathroom and threw my hands up, and sure enough, overrode the experience. And I think, just so that the viewer can connect with practical things and practical actions that you can take to control your internal experience, that's a relevant example as to how we can better take control of what we're actually experiencing and influence ourselves. And if you did the exercise just now, you'll notice that in about 30 seconds, and David has a whole bunch of these, your experience shifts, and it shifts powerfully, and it shifts powerfully in a direction that you are taking control of it. And for me, and I think for a lot of people, we just don't want to feel that we're subject to what we're experiencing, and that we're a slave to ourselves rather than putting ourselves out there. And I think the idea and notion that we're taking control of our lives and exercising free will is actually even more important than what it is that we're going after, whether it's a big sale or whatever. And I think that's really relevant to this idea of controlling our internal experience first and foremost. So I don't know if you want to add to that.
Sure. Well, first of all, what the exercise that Mark showed was a powerhouse of a drill. But if you're going to do the exercise, there's certain parameters and certain things you need to understand. First of all, 30 seconds is not going to necessarily give you it'll give you a taste, but what you want to do is you want to hold this for a minimum of 2 minutes. Now, when Amy was testing this, and this position has actually been clinically tested, they took blood samples, before and after blood samples, and they would have their test subjects, they had control subjects groups as well, they would have their subjects hold this position for 2 minutes or longer. And what they noticed was when they took before and after blood tests from holding this position for 2 minutes or more, they noticed that in the people who held this position for 2 minutes or longer, there was at least a 25% bump in the testosterone levels in their body and a corresponding drop in the levels of cortisol. So not only did they become more assertive, dominant, and confident, they also became more relaxed. Now, just shifting the physiology, even if this weren't a power pose, as Amy likes to call it, would significantly change your psycho-emotional state. Now, there's lots of drills that I do. We don't have time for them here. If you come out to our meetups or you look at some of our videos on on our YouTube channel or NLP Power or davidsnydernlp.com, you'll see me doing this stuff with the audiences over and over and over again. But you want to hold this posture for at least 2 minutes. What you're going to notice is as you approach that 2-minute mark, there will be almost kind of like a tension that builds up in the body. It's almost like there's a part of you that wants to stay the same and a part of you that's fighting to change. Once you break that 2-minute mark, or within a few seconds either way, you're going to notice almost a shift or a relaxing and a sighing into that feeling. And the longer you hold it, the more powerfully that state is going to build within you. Now, here's a little funny story with that. And one of the ways that they tested this, by the way, besides the blood test, was they actually took these people who held this posture and they simulated the most violent, vigorous, challenging job interviews that they could come up with. And they sent these people in over and over and again. And consistently, the people who did that posture prior, or one of the other power postures that Amy teaches in the video, prior to going in to the meeting, always scored higher by the interviewers who were specially trained to give no feedback whatsoever, or all consistently scored higher by the interviewers than the people who did not do these postures. There is no place where these postures will not help you. I mentioned earlier that I'm a consultant. I work with a company known as Next Trial Innovations. We specialize specifically in teaching advanced communication, influence, and persuasion skills to personal injury attorneys, the good guys, the ones that actually cry when their victims are hurt. One of my students actually was going through a very, very tough case. He was getting his butt handed to him, literally, by a very high-powered attorney. Lots of lawyers. He was one guy against, 2 or 3 others. I'm filling in some of the details. They're a little hazy. But one of the things he would do is every chance he got, he would hit that restroom, and boom, he would go in there and he'd hit that posture for 2 to 5 minutes. He'd come out. He said it didn't last all day, but he could give himself boosters for that, and he did very, very well. But that's not actually the funny story. The funny story was his client, in addition to being being a victim of an accident, was also the head football coach at one of the local high schools. And as part of my client's job, is he has to prepare his client to take the witness stand. His client had massive stage fright. I mean, the guy couldn't string 2 words together without wanting to faint and break out in a sweat. So he literally taught the guy how to do the power pose, and had him drill it over and over and over again. And the guy went up on stage, or up onto the witness stand, and just rocked it, right? But that's not even the story. The story was the coach, little did we know, had been going back and teaching his football team, who had had a consistent losing streak for the last 3 or 4 seasons, how to do this before every game and during every intermission, and they took the championship that year. So it's not just relevant to selling. It's not just relevant to dating. It's relevant to any place where you need to be strong, confident, assertive, and outgoing and dominant. So you can't do it too much, right? So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and even expanding upon that, there's hacks and tweaks that you can make it even more powerful than just extending the time of it. So
absolutely. And one of the fastest ways to get the biggest bang for your buck on the generative side is to clear up the stuff you're carrying around inside of you, the little movies that play every time you have to approach a human being, and there's any notable similarity between that person and something that happened to you in the past, which is what happens. Your nervous system sorts for similarities, and it plays what's familiar.